So join me in welcoming Catherine Austin Fitts.
Good afternoon. You're all back there. You sure you don't want to move up here? We can have a more intimate conversation. Okay, screen come down. Okay, so I changed it after listening to all the conversations yesterday, which were fabulous. I decided to change the nature and title of my presentation to What About You? Blockchains and Cryptocurrencies, What About You? And just by way of introduction, I published something called the Solari Report. And basically, we're interested in you having a free and inspired life, and anything that has to do with that is what we're interested in. And of course, that includes blockchain and cryptocurrencies. My investment model, let me just explain. It's a little bit different than the traditional investment model. I call it the Solari investment model. When I look at an investment, whether it's of your time or your money or your attention, I'm very interested in both the return to the investor, what you get, but also the return to the network. And I'm a person who's lived through many, many bubbles. I'll never forget, I was a partner in a Wall Street firm, and I had a great partner named Peter Flanagan. And he would always fight with the trading partners about what they should get for their bonuses every year. And so finally he went off and he did an analysis. And he came back and he was able to prove to the partnership that if we, instead of having traders in the trading floor, if we put chimpanzees in the chairs and just run the same average balances that we'd had the whole time, we would have made more money. It was my first experience with a bubble. And so I'm very interested into the return to the network. If something has a very positive return to the investor and a negative return to the network, I'm not interested because I don't think it's sustainable. Okay. A great quote, I want to talk about sort of the good news and the bad news. And I'm going to start off looking at the big picture. I'm going to look at the macro. What does it mean to you from the macro point of view? Then I'm going to turn down and look at the micro. There was a great article in Financial Times the other day reviewing several new books on money, and there was the author, Dr. Rebecca Spang, said, "Money is and always has been political. Our central concern should not be with money's technology, but with the political and legal framework within which it operates." So let me just let's start here. If you look at the global governance, and I'm going to ask for audience participation, if you look at the global governance system, if I was to ask you to go into a court of law and document and prove how the governance system on planet Earth worked, who here could do that? Now, one person raises their hand. Who here believes that the governance system on planet Earth is a bit of a mystery? Okay. Did you ever think about how strange and weird it is that we live on a planet where we're not allowed to know how the governance system works? Okay. Now, if you look at the current system, it's invisible, and the financial system is a very critical part of that system. And so when you think about redesigning the financial system, you have to realize that you're redesigning the governance system, which means it's a very dynamic interaction between how the governance system works and how the money works. It's one of the reasons that money is so political. So think in terms, it was very interesting. I was having a conversation yesterday with a group of people, and they were saying, oh, we can just change the governance system by changing the money system. You can't solve a political problem with a financial product. If there's one thing I get across to you today, let me say it again, you cannot solve a financial problem or a political system with a financial product. If you look at the system that is in place, to the extent that we can intuit who it is and what they're doing, we know that it's centralizing. Part of it is this technology gives us great power to centralize. But we also know it has values that are opposed to individual and national sovereignty. And frankly, the opposition to individual sovereignty has been going on for centuries. It's certainly nothing new. Okay, so I want to describe who here has seen Aaron Russo's interview with Alex Jones about the governance system. Okay, a couple of you have seen. We're going to play it now because I think it's very important to understand where the current global governance system wants to go to. Aaron Russo was a a wonderful movie producer. He was the producer that made The Rose, Trading Places, very successful.
The ultimate goal that these people have in mind
let's go.
is the goal to create a one-world government run by the banking industry, run by the bankers, and they're doing it in sections. The European currency, the euro, and the European Constitution is one part of it, and the whole agenda is to create a one-world government where everybody has an RFID chip implanted in them. All money is to be in those chips, right? There'll be no more cash. And this is giving me straight from Rockefeller himself. This is what they want to accomplish. And all money will be in your chips. And so instead of having cash, anytime you have money in your chip, they can take out whatever they want to take out whenever they want to. And I was definitely being recruited, but it's more subtle than that.
Well, in your words, just go through the process, and then what he said.
Well, what it is remember we were friends, and we used to come to my house a lot. We'd have dinner, we'd talk, and he'd tell me about business investments, how you get involved in, or they would help me with this business investment or that business investment. And was I interested in joining the Council on Foreign Relations? I would have to get a letter to join them, but was I interested in that? And, just stuff, leading you on. And I used to say to him that I never really did that because that wasn't where I was coming from. As much as I like you, Nick, your ways and my ways, we're on the opposite side of the fence. I don't believe in enslaving people. And
he would come back with, "Oh, I do." Or?
Well, it would be more like
It's better for them.
Well, it's more like how do I put it? It was like, what do you care about them? What do you care about those people? What difference does it make to you? Take care of your own life. Do the best you can for you and your family. What do the rest of the people mean to you? They don't mean anything to you. They're just serfs. They're just people. It was just a lack of caring, and that's just not who I was. It was just sort of like cold, it was just like cold, and I used to say to him, what's the point of all this? You have all the money in the world you need. You have all the power you need. What's the point? What's the end goal? And he said the end goal is to get everybody chipped, to control the whole society. To have the bankers, the elite people, the bankers and some governor controlling the world. And I said, do all the people in the Council on Foreign Relations believe this way you do? He said, no. Most of them believe they're doing the right thing. So the ultimate goal that these people have in mind is the goal to create a one-world government run by the banking industry, run by the bankers. And they're doing it in sections. The European currency, the euro, and the European Constitution is one part of it. And the whole agenda is to create a...
Great, thank you. Okay, so I wanted to play that because Aaron did such a great job of bringing down an opinion I share, which is, my message having worked in a political pointy status in the first Bush administration and also at the top of Wall Street is, one of the things I know about the governance system is they do believe in slavery. And they do practice slavery. They practice it now. And when we create technologies, if you go back and you look at the history of the African-American slave trade, what you learn is one of the reasons it was canceled was they had no way to perfect collateral. With digital technology, they now have a way to perfect collateral value. So you can now finance buying and selling a human being and chip and perfect your collateral as a matter for the bankers. So when we design very powerful technology that can be used this way, we need to keep this in mind that this is one of the risks. It's very interesting for those of you who know me. For many, many years, I've been giving interviews, and as everybody said, the market was going to collapse. I've said, no, it's not going to collapse. It's going to slow burn. And if you look at why I said that versus collapse, it was because I had a much deeper understanding of the control mechanisms in place to control many things, not just people, but financial markets. So if you look at the management of the equity markets, if you look at the management of the fixed income markets, if you look at the management of government investment, there's tremendous intervention and very proactive management that's coming from a centralized source. So the third quarter wrap-up is going to be on Control 101. Every quarter we publish a wrap-up for the Solari report. The next one's Control 101. If there's any message I can give you about the control system depends on force, physical force. The control system is at the root analog. Okay, it's not digital. And that's what you have to remember, because digital systems have to operate within a world that is controlled analog. So if every place and every person can be physically controlled, it's very hard to use digital systems to create greater freedom, and that's what you need to understand. Another important thing, one thing most people never learned in high school in their history books is the Treaty of Westphalia. Who has ever heard of the Treaty of Westphalia? Oh, I'm impressed. The Treaty of Westphalia was in 1648 and basically created the principle that force is the monopoly of sovereign government. So within any place, you have to deal with one entity that has force. What has happened in the last 10 to 20 years, certainly since the creation of the national security state in 1947, is we are seeing a complete breakdown of the Treaty of Westphalia. And now when you're in a place, it may be the government in that place that has the monopoly on force, but there are often very powerful private, corporate and private interests that are operating with force above the law with impunity. Okay, and that's one of the things that's making operating so complicated. Okay, if I could recommend one book to help you understand the history of information technology as it relates to the governance system, it would be Tim Wu's book, The Master Switch. Anybody here ever heard of it or read it? Okay, I recommend it to you tremendously. He's a professor at Columbia University. What it describes is for the entire history of sort of the digital revolution and the information technology revolution, we start off with the introduction of a new technology. We have an incredibly wonderful innovation period. People get very excited, different products bubble in value, and then wham, everything centralizes. It's almost as though, you know, the general population or the larger group prototypes the innovation, and then finally when the governance system sees how it's all going to work, bam, they use it to centralize. And so the whole history has been one of constant centralization. And the question is this time going to be different? Okay, so I was in the middle of a huge debate with a software developer about whether Bitcoin was a grassroots phenomenon or not. It was in the beginning of August. And the debate was happening while I was taking the train from Germany to Basel, Switzerland. Basel, Switzerland is the home of the Bank of International Settlements. And this guy's telling me this is a grassroots revolution and this is going to change everything. We're battling back and forth. I get to Basel, I have my meeting, I go to the train station, I walk up to the automated, and I drove right past the Bank of International Settlements. I drove right by all the big pharmaceutical companies. I walk into the railway station, I start to buy my ticket to go to Zurich, and it turns out I can buy in Bitcoin, and not only that, I can top up my wallet, care of the Swiss Federal Railway System. So I said, my theory that this is a prototype is getting stronger. Okay, this is one chart I wanted to show you. It's from Fortune 500. It's a picture of the Fortune 500 revenues from 1955 to 2017. Between 1955 and 1995, basically Fortune 500 revenues tracked with the general growth of the GNP. And then in 1995, the tech companies started to move into the Fortune 500, and we created the WTO after passing the Uruguay round of GATT, right? Globalization took off. And what you're looking at is the giant sucking sound of the economy into centralized, particularly publicly traded corporations, okay? And if you go to Washington, what you will discover is the number one source of political contributions is capital gains from that rise or the parallel rise of real estate. It's from capital gains. And so what we've got is we've created a political dynamic, whether it's the technology or the capital markets, that is powerfully centralizing. And again and again and again, when you go around the world and hear the stories of what has happened, whether it's the different negotiations in Europe or the bailouts of the United States, what you're watching is that combined political and corporate tornado hit a local economy and suck things up. Okay, so what caused, let me just say a few words before you play the video. What drove that dollar up? Well, one of the things that drove the stock market and the Fortune 500 revenues up is a significant shift of assets and money out of governments all around the world and into private corporations. I call it the financial coup d'etat. So from 1996 onward, what we have done is we have levered the government, sovereign governments up with tremendous amounts of debt, and we have shifted tremendous amounts of money into private hands and sort of private activities. And let me give you an example of how extraordinary this movement is. Okay, go ahead and start.
Pentagon, the day before 9/11, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld declared war, not on foreign terrorists.
The adversary is closer to home. It's the Pentagon bureaucracy.
He said money wasted by the military poses a serious threat.
In fact, it could be said that it's a matter of life and death.
Rumsfeld promised change, but the next day, the world changed. And in the rush to fund the war on terrorism, the war on waste seems to have been forgotten.
My 03 budget calls for more than $48 billion in new defense spending.
More money for the Pentagon when its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
$2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
First question. My second question, Mr. Secretary, according to the Comptroller General of the United States, there are serious financial management problems at the Pentagon, to which Mr. Cooper alluded. Fiscal year 1999, $2.3 trillion missing. Fiscal year 2000, $1.1 trillion missing. And DOD is the #1 reason why the government can't balance its checkbook. The Pentagon has claimed year after year that the reason it can't account for the money is because its computers don't communicate with each other. My second question, Mr. Secretary, is who has the contracts today to make those systems communicate with each other? How long have they had those contracts? And how much have the taxpayers paid for them? Finally, Mr. Secretary, after the last hearing, I thought that my office was promised a written response to my question regarding the 4 war games on September 11th. I have not yet received that response, but would like for you to respond to the questions that I've put to you today, and then I do expect the written response to my previous question, hopefully by the end of the week. Question, please.
The second question, I've forgotten what the second question was.
Not used to
I think
accountability.
Ms. Jonas knows it.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. McKinney. I appreciate the question. I appreciate your interest in our department's financial condition, and we are working very hard on that program. I've just come back recently.
I understand that you're working hard on it, but my question was, who has the contract? How long have they had that contract? And how much money have we spent on it?
In general, we spend about $20 billion in the Department on Information Technology Systems. The accounting systems are part of that. I can get you the exact number for the record of what we spend on our current, what we call legacy systems, and those that we're moving toward.
And who has the contracts?
That would be a multitude of individuals.
Could you name some, please?
Well, I think off the top
Is there anybody here who doesn't know who does their books?
I'd rather provide that for the record.
That's not privileged information, is it?
I'm sure it's not.
Well, please.
Yeah.
And we still have time, so please.
I would be glad to provide for the record. I don't want to talk from the top of my head.
Scope is hard to imagine. Republican Congressman Darrell Issa joining us now to help us figure out what this all means. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us for Happy Hour. I saw you quote it. You're using the analogy to the birth of Christ, that we wouldn't have spent as much money since his birth, that this big old bailout. Very interesting to come up with that.
Well, it's even worse than that. It's if we spent $1 million a day every day since the birth of Christ, we wouldn't get to $1 trillion. And we're likely to lose far more than that. You know, having $23.7 trillion at risk basically is about 1.5 times all the money that every man, woman, and child in America produces. The entire gross domestic product's only about $17 trillion. So this is an amazing amount of money at risk. And it's okay to have it at risk in order to get America moving again. What's not okay is what we're going to hear from the special IG tomorrow, which is he's being locked out of any kind of oversight, reporting, transparency, all the things we were promised. He's
missing, Ed, is this. We had a national tragedy, an economic disaster that took place barely a year ago. In the last 18 months of the Bush administration, America lost $12 trillion on its net worth. That's $40,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country. And I cannot think of a single person who's held responsible for that. Nobody in government, nobody on Wall Street, nobody nowhere. That's the fundamental problem right now. And if people on Wall Street are going to continue to get great bonuses in good times and in bad times, we can kiss this economy goodbye. It's not going to work. In capitalism, winners have to win and losers have to lose, and nobody's been held responsible for that enormous erosion. 20% of our accumulated wealth over the course of 2 centuries gone in 18 months. Nobody's been punished for that. That's the problem.
So altogether, $26 trillion of bailouts just in those 2 categories, not including TARP, not including FDIC financing of U.S. institutions. $26 trillion, that's almost $100,000 for every man, woman, and child in America, all done by the Federal Reserve without any act of Congress authorizing it.
All right. There's a lot of numbers thrown around here, and sometimes when you just hear it abstractly, 13 billion sounds like it's larger than 7 trillion. Which of all of these numbers, which outrages you the most and which should outrage the public the most?
I think that we can all agree the trillions of dollars that were extended by the Federal Reserve to the banks in the form of corporate welfare. What they did is they took our money, the U.S. dollar, the fact that they control the currency, the fact that they have control of the money supply, and for the first time in history, and I'm talking about in the 100-year history of the Federal Reserve, they played favorites. They said, we'll give $100 trillion to this institution, $100 billion to this institution, another $100 billion to this institution, and so on down the line, when you and I couldn't even come close to accessing that kind of money on those terms. They lent out this money at 0.01% interest. 0.01% interest. Go try to get a loan like that from your bank. Bloomberg's report that there are trillions of dollars in off-balance sheets transactions that the Federal Reserve has entered into since last September. Are you familiar with those off-balance sheet transactions?
You know, I think it may be important at this point, too, just to bring up a certain aspect related to our jurisdiction. And just to clarify perhaps some of my earlier comments, we are the Inspector General for the Board of Governors, and we have direct oversight over board programs and operations, and are also able to look at board delegated functions to the reserve banks, as well as the board's oversight and supervision of the reserve banks. We do not have jurisdiction to directly go out and audit reserve bank activities.
Pentagon, the day before 9/11.
You going to stop? Stop. Okay, so what you just said is, you know, if the New York Fed member or the other member banks made $27 trillion of free transactions, gave it away, she had no jurisdiction to understand or look at it or know about it. Okay. So we used to make cartoons about this, trying to get people interested, because let me tell you something. I come back to the governance system. If you can finance and access an infinite amount of money on a non-transparent, secret basis, then you can run the whole planet outside the law, because the federal credit mechanism has now provided that to you. So we used to make these cartoons. My favorite was we had a UFO with Lockheed Martin on it, and the DOD accountant is being asked to produce the financials, and he's saying he's got a problem because their accountants were abducted by a UFO. We've had many excuses like that. And another one, because many people say, well, this is very overwhelming, what does it mean to me? And here we have a guy saying, you know, I shouldn't care about this, what does all of this mean to me? And meantime, the hand is reaching into his wallet from behind the wall. Okay, so why am I telling you all of this related to cryptocurrencies and blockchain? Everyone here who's an American citizen has lived under the benefit and the protection of the American Constitution, no matter how much it's been eroded, no matter how much, certainly since 9/11, it's been eroded. And the reality is that that means you have the right to own assets and buy and sell. You have individual sovereignty, and you have the right to own assets. I'm constantly asked by people, should I put my money in gold? Should I put my money in Bitcoin? Should I put my money in stocks? And what I'm going to tell you is, if they are able in the next 3 years, and they're going to try hard to shred the Constitution, it doesn't matter what you have, because it can be stripped. Okay? Bitcoin, everything. So, you know, if there's an issue, we keep hearing there's $20 trillion of debt. Well, yes, there's $20 trillion of debt, but there's $19 trillion of assets floating out there somewhere that actually belong to us. And it's a very different policy conversation if that $19 trillion is on the table. I've heard several people yesterday say, oh, God, it would be so great. We could implode and destroy the U.S. government. Well, okay, let's look. Yes, we've moved, my count is now over 50 trillion. We've moved trillions out of the U.S. government between the bailouts and the missing money. But what have we done? We've left the liabilities in there. So if you want to steal everything, you have to have a way to abrogate all those liabilities. Well, what are those liabilities? Military pensions, government pensions, corporate pension insurance, Social Security disability. Right now, in many counties in America, Social Security disability is the universal basic income. That's how it's operating. Deposit insurance, flood insurance, mortgage insurance. Can you imagine telling everybody in Houston their flood insurance was no good? Food stamps, housing subsidies, and I keep going on. If you do, I've spent a lot of my time in life looking at place-based data. If you look at all the government data for the 3,100 counties in America, what do you see? 50% or more, directly or indirectly, coming from the U.S. government of household incomes. It's unfortunately, we've become, you know, sometimes I say Russia won the Cold War, because we have, at the local level, a very Soviet economy. Okay, so cryptocurrencies. Should you do it or not? Let's talk through, I was just in a great debate in the decentralization panel with, we had a couple people going to each other. Did anybody here go to the decentralization? Oh, you missed it. It was sparks. The sparks were flying. My expectation is I think cryptocurrencies are going to grow, and I'll tell you why. There is enormous demand in the general population globally to create currencies. If you think the demand for cryptocurrencies is high, you can't imagine how high the demand is for local currencies. At the end of the Great Depression, there were 3,100 local currencies. There are 3,100 counties, not surprisingly. So there's tremendous demand, and I think people want to do this and play and innovate, and to the extent that that's allowed, it's going to happen. The second thing is, you know, all around the world, there are people who would love to transact, and they would love to transact cross-border at low transaction cost, high speed. And that demand is astonishing. And interestingly enough, we want it, and Mr. Global wants it. So there's a remarkable sort of intersection of desire that makes this something that Mr. Global wants to have prototyped. Now, the danger is, if I can steal $19 trillion from two agencies of the federal government, God knows how much has left the others, how much money do I have? And I can use that money to manage the stock market and the fixed income market. How much money do I have available on a secret, non-transparent basis to pump any cryptocurrency market? A lot, okay? So whenever you see a market, I've lived through many different pumps in my life. You know, it's funny, I was at Esther Dyson's conference in 1997, and I was watching venture capital guys throw $10 million at companies each, $10 million each. You know, if a guy said, I only need $1 million, they said, it's not enough, you have to take 10. And they were throwing money at companies that were never going to succeed. Everybody knew they were never going to succeed. Why was that? Because they wanted to pump the stock market with a bubble. So the danger is you're in a pump and dump. And if you're investing in a speculative investment that's in a pump, you need to manage it accordingly. There are lots of great rules on speculative investment, but you need to manage it accordingly. The digital insecurity is mind-boggling. John McAfee just gave a speech on how to lose money on Bitcoin. It's called Pandora's Box. It's up at Solari.com, and I would recommend it to you because if you look at the time and effort it takes a new user to learn the system and manage it without user error or losing money to hacking, it's a big effort. So you need to appreciate going into this that there's digital insecurity. Finally, regulatory values or controls are going to drive value. So we saw what happened with China, but I assure you the regulators globally have the power to drive any cryptocurrency out of business whenever they want, and they can do it like that. The speed is amazing to see. I have many people tell me, oh, I'm going to use Bitcoin because then I can just not pay my taxes. Good luck with that. Finally, as I said, follow the rules of speculative investment. And finally, my key point, if we can't enforce the Constitution in the United States, it doesn't matter which asset you hold your holdings in. You can be stripped of all of them. So I would say if we want to make cryptocurrencies something that we do and value, then okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about what Mr. Global is buying, okay? Because I dare say Mr. Global is moving a lot of money around, but it's not into Bitcoin. Although tremendous investment in blockchain, which I think is a very important technology. Space, huge investment in space. Chinese stock market has gone from $0 to $7 trillion in 25 years and continues to rise. One of the things that's happening is incomes in Asia are converging with the United States, so, and the G7. So let's say we have $60,000 a year of per capita income. They have $10,000 to $15,000 of per capita income. Imagine a world where everybody in India and China also has $60,000 a year of per capita income. So you're watching a convergence, which is one of the biggest investment sort of trends happening. And finally, if you look at the land report of the 100 largest owners of land in the United States, their holdings have doubled since 2008. Okay, so at the decentralization panel, they were arguing Bitcoin versus gold, and somebody said maybe you ought to think about seeds too. Okay, so I go back to what I said before. My focus is on return to the investor and return to the network as well. To me, blockchain has incredible potential for both sides. Cryptocurrencies maybe, but the political risks are enormous. And whether you go in personally or you watch what's happening and support it as an industry, you need to understand the risks of where the governance system would like to go. Okay, so with that, I'll be around here until the end of the day tomorrow. We have 5 minutes for questions. If I don't get your questions answered now, I'll be here until the end of the day tomorrow.
Yes, ma'am. Catherine, it's very nice to hear your voice in person. The first time I heard you was about 15 years ago on Jeff Grant's. And since then, I've had countless hours of listening to you. Simple question. We thought back then that maybe gold would climb to pay off our debt, U.S. debt. Now, is it possible years down the road the government could own a handful of Bitcoins, grow that value, and pay off the U.S. debt with the dollar? Do you follow my question?
Yeah, it's theoretically possible. So right now, Bitcoin, my understanding is Bitcoin can't scale to the extent that they would need to prototype it. But I absolutely, what I've always said is Mr. Global doesn't care if it's the dollar, the euro, or wampum beads. They want a digital currency. And for many of the reasons we want digital currencies too. I think the big reason is the one that Aaron Rousseau described. So they're going to continue to prototype, and they're going to encourage other people to prototype as they figure out what they want to do and how to do it. And that's why what you want to watch is how, because right now, remember, what has happened with the central banks of Bitcoin? They've been doing one thing. One, they've been buying gold, and as other people are buying Bitcoin, and that's keeping gold available for them to buy. So part of that is part of a sort of competitive play. But the other thing they're doing is they're trying to understand how they can use blockchain and how they can use cryptocurrencies. The danger is as follows. These technologies give you the ability to re-engineer down to a very small number of banks. And who is the bank that's going to have the competitive edge? It's going to be the banks who are part of the syndicate that have force, that can control through physical force and act above the law with impunity. At least that's how they're doing now. So the design question for us is, we're happy to end up with lots of digital currencies as long as we can also transact offline. How do we use blockchain and these other tools to enforce the laws sufficient to make it much harder for them to act outside the law with impunity? But I assure you, where they want to go is they want to use these technologies to centralize, whether they call it a central bank or something else. Right now, what's the biggest headline in the world? Are we going to nuclear war with North Korea? Why are we going to nuclear war with Korea? Is it because they have rockets? Or is it because they're not in the BIS system? After 9/11, Wesley Clark said we're going to attack 7 countries in 5 years. That list happened to include all the countries who are not in the BIS system. So, it's funny. We're both heading towards the same place, and the question is, do we take it decentralizing? Do we take it centralized? Any other questions?
If there's repatriation, would that reduce the threat of this debt we have?
Repatriation.
Funds from the American companies that have their money offshore.
That will do 2 things. It will bring a lot more money back here for investment in America, and it will make life much more difficult globally because we've lent tremendous amounts of dollars, so it's going to make dollars dear, and it's going to put globally the dollar, much of the world is going to go into a dollar bear trap. So it will argue for a strong dollar, and one of the reasons Trump keeps trying to talk the dollar down is he runs the risk of getting into a dollar bear trap. Okay, so we're almost out of time. We have time for one more.
Well, the chances of the large bank failures, Deutsche Bank, Barclays, Citibank, people not being able to use their debit and credit cards and running towards cryptocurrencies and losing more faith in the government handling of our money supplies.
I think there's 0 chance of those banks failing. What did we see with the bailouts? We saw tremendous amounts of money go out the door in the financial coup d'etat, and the market shares of those banks get much more powerful. Those banks have essentially a government monopoly. So it's very tied to the political system, and they will always compost us to keep the system going. So I would be very, very careful to fall into the trap of believing the global reset phenomena where things are going to crash right away. The system is, any system that steals this much money from governments and holds that money under its control and those assets is in the catbird seat right now. It's not going to fail. Okay? So more for discussion, please. I'll be here if you have questions. Oh, I do? Okay, great. So this is wonderful because one of the things I run into is a great many retail investors who are planning on the dollar crashing tomorrow, and they're planning on, this great big global reset. And here's the essence of the system. We are on a model called the central banking warfare model, and it's true the model no longer works. We need to go to a new model. Okay, so the question that we're debating globally is how do we do that? It's a very painful transition. But the way the model works is the central banks create money, and then the military makes sure they take it. Okay, so if you look at if you and I were to look at all the different military bases and military presence around the world, that is very much tied, and our Navy basically policing the sea lanes, that is very much tied to maintaining and keeping the dollar liquidity globally. If you look at whether it's the military or the payment systems, The dollar has massively more liquidity and massive more military behind it than any other currency. There's no other currency capable of replacing it. And that's part of the challenge. Could cryptocurrencies change that? It would take many decades, and it would take the regulators basically deciding what the treatment was going to be and working out with the banks how they were going to treat it. So this is a very long life process. The system, think of it this way, I'm going to grossly oversimplify the financial coup d'etat. Imagine for a second that the leadership of G7 in 1995, when they started to do this, said, look, the baby boomers are ready to retire. All their lives they put all this money in the pension system, in the government system. We can either spend that money for nursing homes, or we can take that money and we can spend it on lots of other things, globalizing, investing in the emerging markets, doing all these other things. What should we do? Is it going to be nursing homes or building what I call Global 3.0? Now, they took the money, okay? So we had the bailouts. We had up to $19 trillion now missing from the federal government. Who knows what the real number is? Now that they have that money, they're very strong. There's no reason for them to collapse. Now, the people who are expecting those pensions and depending on their Social Security, they might collapse. But the system is strong because it made sure it had those resources. Okay? So when you look at an analysis of the instability of the system, understand that they want to shift the system, and the old systems and the old governments are essentially being sucked dry and then collapsed. And now we're negotiating the process of, okay, how do we do that given all the liabilities? But the system has made itself very strong.
I was just curious about the state of derivatives. That's been waiting to explode, hasn't it? And isn't that intrinsic to the pension? Are we going to see something major, or is that just...
Well, here's the problem. We've issued trillions of dollars of fixed income layered with trillions of dollars of derivatives, and there's really no there behind it. So we have two choices. Imagine you have a house. Just pretend the planet's a house, and it's got a mortgage, and the mortgage has gotten too big, and it's now worth more than the house. We can write down the mortgage, or we can grow the house. So if you look at the last analysis of the BIS on this very topic, it ended with the following sentence. In its summary, it says, I think we need to focus on equity solutions. Okay? Because if we all share equity globally in a system, then we have an incentive to help each other succeed because we need the equity to go up. And here's the secret message. If you look at the power of blockchain and the other technologies we're talking here, in theory, it has that kind of potential. It has the potential to help us re-engineer, leave a debt system, go to an equity system, and create the rise in equity that lifts all boats.
Raises us above usury as a race.
What?
Raises us above usury as a race.
Well, part of it is right now we have a win-lose relationship with Mr. Global. And Mr. Global is playing divide and conquer games to turn us against each other. The power of an equity model is we can re-engineer the transactional ecosystem, whether it's in a tiny local village all the way to the planetary, financial system, where we make money from helping each other succeed, okay? And in fact, if you look at the analog world of oil and gas or real estate, it's much more a win-lose game. If you look at information technology, it's much more collaborative win-win, and it's inherent in the economics of it. So the potential is there. The question is, how do we transition the legal structure? If Mr. Global says, look, it's a lot simpler to just tear up the Constitution and chip everybody, will it be wonderful? Yes, for Mr. Global, not so much for us. So the question is, how do we make the transition and wind up with a human society? Right. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.